Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Friday, September 3rd, 2021. And yes, we've already started a new month. And if you want additional weather information, as always, you can go to weather.gov/Alaska. We have all sorts of information there online. Well, check our weather headlines coming up here as we head into the weekend. Overall, just broad area of low pressure across much of the state, including the Gulf of Alaska on up through western and northwest portions of the state, bringing areas of rain or scattered, mainly light showers in much of the state. There are a few areas that are going to get a bit more precipitation, but nothing terribly heavy for this time of year. Overall, though, we are going to see temperatures begin to cool later on this weekend into early next week across the northern half of the state. That'll include along either side of the Brooks Range, so that includes North Slope and central interior as we head into Sunday and especially Monday, Tuesday. But there are signs that as we go into mid-September, we could see mild weather prevail across the eastern part of the state, with generally some wet weather holding on there, Seward Peninsula into perhaps the YK Delta. Well, right now we are watching satellite imagery. You can see the brighter enhanced white cloud tops of a low pressure system that's kind of pulling out of the North Pacific up into the lower Gulf. That's heading northeastward and will impact the southeast panhandle and especially the southern half of the panhandle. Ketchikan areas there could pick up 1 to 2 inches of rain through the course of the weekend, especially Saturday into early Sunday. Some of the interior coastal mountains could see a bit more than that, higher elevations. Otherwise, just broad area low pressure just kind of lags back through the northern Gulf as well as across the southwest, west central, and northwest areas of the state. And there's been some better rain today too between Bethel and McGrath, over ½ an inch in some areas there near and south of the Yukon River. There's also been a dense fog advisory just recently issued along the Arctic coast at Deadhorse, where visibilities have been down around 1/4 mile, and that'll be the case here as we head through this evening and into the overnight hours. Otherwise, low pressure will generally rule the state. We're not looking for much in the way of clear skies, certainly not like the weather we had last weekend in south central into interior areas. Definitely going to be a cloudier, bit more dreary weekend as we finally head into the new month of September. Low pressure, as you can see, is located there far North Pacific, lifting northeastward up into the Gulf, and will be impacting the panhandle as we go through this weekend. And just the areas of low pressure kind of lagging back there through the west. Weak frontal system. That frontal system will continue to weaken as it pushes inland. Also just some lagging or lingering troughs there along coastal areas of the north central Gulf back into the eastern Aleutians and southwest peninsula. Now overnight we expect that front there in the west to continue to work its way inland and weaken with some areas of rain or rain showers along it. In the colder air farther north there is some snow, but you have to really get out over the Arctic Ocean or Chukchi Sea. And the low will continue to lift northeastward toward Haida Gwaii, going on its way to bring additional rainfall to the panhandle here as we go through Saturday and early Sunday. On Saturday, look for that low to lift northeastward up into the southern panhandle there with additional rains and some lower ceilings has been the case today, and then back out across the North Gulf and back all the way trough lagging back there just south of the Alaska Peninsula, eastern and central Aleutians. Meanwhile, the trough weakens as it crosses in through the central interior with areas of rain and rain showers. Could even be an isolated thunderstorm eastern half along and north of the Alaska Range toward the Alcan border Saturday afternoon. And in some of those areas, as I said, north of Tok and east of Fairbanks, there could be a pocket of some steadier rains, perhaps ½ an inch to an inch of rainfall during the day on Saturday. And then back out toward the northwest, we do have a cold front area of low pressure along the Arctic, Russian Arctic coast. It'll be approaching the Bering Strait. That moves inland Sunday and weakens with yet a reinforcing shot of colder air just poised off of the northwest coast there, pushing through the Chukchi Sea on Sunday afternoon, and that's the push of colder air that's going to bring cooler temperatures to the northern half of the state here later this weekend, and especially going through Monday and Tuesday north of the Yukon River. So Saturday morning, look for lows generally around 50 in the southeast panhandle, upper 40s to around or just above 50 there in south central areas. High temperatures at best may get up around 60 there at Haines or Skagway, and as well as around Anchorage on up toward Talkeetna and Glen Allen, otherwise 50s elsewhere. Lows, the panhandle will generally be around 50 to low 50s again on Sunday morning, upper 40s to around 50 or so across much of the south central areas, and high temperatures on Sunday, not all that much warmer, 60 degrees at best there, the Kenai, and on up through Anchorage, Talkeetna, and Glen Allen. And then looking across the north, lows will be in the mid and upper 30s Saturday morning, again with some areas of dense fog along the Arctic coast. Otherwise, the Yukon Valley generally in the 40s. High temperatures Saturday afternoon will be warmest east central areas. Still some readings in the lower 60s, including Fort Yukon, Fairbanks, and on over toward Northway. Meanwhile, highs will only be in the 40s along the northwest Arctic coast and across much of the Seward Peninsula. And Sunday morning lows, look for lows mid and upper 30s along the northwest and into the Seward Peninsula, and then generally low to mid 40s up through the Yukon Valley, with temperatures again in the upper Yukon Valley along the Alcan in around 60 degrees, but readings only around or just a bit above 40 along the northwest Arctic coast and Seward Peninsulas. The southwest will have lows generally in the upper 40s overnight into Saturday morning, upper 40s as well, extending out along the Aleutian chain. Saturday afternoon, cooler temperatures, upper 40s, lower 50s across much of the southwest interior, the Y-K deltas, and mid 50s extending into the Aleutians. And then on Sunday morning, look for lows down around or just above 40 degrees across much of the southwest, maybe slightly warmer toward the Alaska Range, and generally mid to upper 40s extending out across the Alaska Peninsula into the central Aleutians. And taking a look then at high temperatures Sunday afternoon, we'll see readings generally upper 40s to lower 50s across the southwest interior, again Bethel on up toward Aniak, and then extending down along the Alaska Peninsula. Highs will generally be mid to maybe upper 50s and mid 50s in the Aleutians. A quick check of the temperature outlook here, the extended outlook September 9th through the 13th. As we approach mid-month, we are anticipating temperatures could average a bit above normal, especially from south central areas, Anchorage on up toward Fairbanks and Prudhoe Bay. And then precipitation is once again favoring maybe a bit above normal precipitation, the Seward Peninsula, YK deltas in the west side of the state, and a little drier conditions there up along the northeast Arctic coast and the Alaska-Canadian border, and near normal precipitation across the southeast panhandle. So here we are just a few days in September. Hopefully we get a little bit nicer, warmer weather here by mid-month.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for your aviation weather segment, and if you are planning a flight over this weekend, a couple of primary weather systems. One is low pressure out over the lower Gulf that's impacting the panhandle, especially the southern portion of the panhandle and Haida Gwaii. And then there's going to be another area of low pressure that kind of dips down into the Bering Strait area later in the weekend. In the meantime, we have low pressure generally out over the northwest portion of the state with a trailing front that's going to weaken into a trough, and that's what's creating the IFR conditions there along the west. Throughout Saturday morning, widespread IFR conditions across much of the northern Gulf on into portions of the southeast and then back out across the Aleutians. Saturday afternoon, we'll see conditions improve, generally MVFR across the interior with perhaps an isolated thunderstorm popping up there along and just north of the central and eastern Alaska Range toward the Alcan border, and IFR conditions, especially the southern part of the panhandle, including Ketchikan. And then as we head on over towards Sunday, look for IFR conditions still across much of the panhandle there in the morning, portions of the northwest and Arctic coast, and then back out over the central and western Bering. And for Sunday afternoon, we'll still see some areas of IFR in the interior along the western northwest portion of the Alaska range on up into the central Yukon Valley, and then still some areas of IFR there along the northern Gulf Coast into the interior coastal mountains there of the Panhandle. So past conditions on Saturday, and at Tuvik we'll see IFR conditions in the morning becoming MVFR. Same thing at Adigan, look for IFR becoming MVFR later in the morning and afternoon. General theme will continue down along the Alaska range, Merrill on up through Lake Clark. We are looking for IFR conditions in the early morning becoming MVFR as the day unfolds. Same thing for Rainy Pass, IFR conditions, especially the south or east entrance becoming MVFR. Also, Windy Pass will see IFR conditions become MVFR with mainly the IFR conditions on the south side of the Alaska range and through in the south entrance in particular. Isabel will generally see MVFR conditions throughout the day Saturday with perhaps a slight chance of an isolated thunderstorm embedded with some scattered showers. Same thing at Metasta. Look for MVFR conditions on Saturday with perhaps a chance of an isolated thunderstorm popping up there with the daytime heating. Tanita, IFR conditions becoming MVFR. And Portage will generally see IFR conditions hold on across the east entrance going out into Prince William Sound with MVFR conditions there and the west entrance. And then for Chilkoot and White in the northern Panhandle, look for IFR conditions in the morning becoming MVFR later in the morning and afternoon. And quick check of freezing levels. They are generally lowest there. Chukchi Sea, the Bering Strait, as low as down to around 2,000 feet. 4,000 feet there from St. Lawrence Island towards St. Matthew. Freezing levels across the interior are generally between 6,000 and 8,000 feet, and generally around 8,000 feet there in the lower Panhandle as well as into the eastern Aleutians. Icing potential will exist mainly between 12,000 and 18,000 feet there in the southeast, including Haida Gwaii, and then back through the southwest between 10,000 and 16,000 feet, and then further north back through the western northwest parts of the state, and a pocket there along the Alcan border between 10,000 and 16,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds, we do have a weak low circulation there, centered just south of the Kenai, with 110 knot southwest winds coming onshore into British Columbia and Vancouver, and then back to the northwest off of eastern Russia, northwest winds aloft at 30,000 feet, around and in excess of 100 knots. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, we see the low pressure circulation there along the southern Panhandle, with strongest winds coming onshore there and through the intercoastal mountains upwards of 55 knots from the south-southwest, and then back there out through the northern Bering into eastern Russia, winds out of the northwest upwards to 50 knots at 9,000 feet, and dropping down to 3,000 feet, still have low pressure circulation there along the coast of the Panhandle, with winds upwards to 50 knots from the southwest moving into portions of British Columbia, and again strongest winds back out there toward the western Bering. And as a result, we do expect the potential for turbulence on Saturday across especially the southern portions of the Panhandle into British Columbia between the surface and 6,000 feet, and then back out toward the eastern and central Aleutians between the surface and 4,000 feet. So that's your aviation weather. Have a safe flight if you're heading out.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Hangar Flying. My name is Mary O'Connor, and I'm with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. This evening, I have with me Tom George, who is the Alaska representative of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Hi, Tom.
Good evening, Mary. Pleasure to be with you.
Tom, we understand that there are some charting changes taking place for one of the well-known passes that's used by pilots in Alaska. Can you give us an overview of this pass and its location?
I'd be happy to. The route we're talking about is the route from Anchorage to McGrath across a section of the Alaska range. And while if the weather in our aircraft is up to just getting up to altitude and going straight across, that's the most efficient way to do it. But if either weather or aircraft capability or the reason we're making the trip keeps us lower, we've got to find a route through the Alaska range to make this flight. And I'd like to provide some definitions to help with this discussion. And I've not been able to find a true aviation mountain pass definition, but I did find this from World Landforms. Mountain pass is the highest portion of a path through the mountain range. The highest portion of the route is also the lowest route that can be traveled between mountains on either side. So we both have the pass giving us the high point, but it is part of a route to get us through a set of mountains or hills terrain. What the FAA provides is a mountain pass chart symbol that tells us where that high point is, but it doesn't tell us anything about the actual route itself.
Thank you for that definition and clarification of those terms. Now that we know exactly what we're talking about, can you show us the routes that we're going to be addressing?
So to zoom in on the central Alaska range a little bit more, the orange route that we're seeing here would take you through Rainy Pass, which is the higher route, and also through more precipitous terrain. So there is an alternate route through Ptarmigan Pass, and that's where we're going to see the changes to the names if people are looking to fly that route. And let me give you a little more background on the history of that. This is a document from the 1930s, 1934, that talked about flying through the Alaska range. And this is what they had to say about Rainy Pass. The backbone of the Alaska range is reached at Rainy Pass, which is of moderate elevation, very narrow with many sharp turns, and should never be flown on account of violent downdrafts and the fact that if cloudiness is encountered in the pass, it is impossible to turn around. They also went on to talk about the alternative route, known as Ptarmigan Pass, with a U shape to the south of the airway, 2 to 3 miles wide with no sharp turns so that it could be flown safely when ceilings are below the summit of the mountains and still be possible to turn airplanes around in the pass if necessary. So these are both very long passes of very long standing, and that advice about Rainy Pass probably was pretty good advice given the nature of the aircraft that they were flying in those days.
This historical perspective is fascinating, and it is interesting to know that these passes have been used and documented for a long time. So our beloved Ptarmigan Pass is the one that's being renamed and re-identified on the charts. Can you show us what these changes are going to look like on the charts and what pilots should expect to see?
I'd be happy to. The magic date is August the 12th, 2021. And before that time, the chart, as it's actually run today, still shows Rainy Pass as it always has, no change there. The location that historically was called Ptarmigan Pass has been changed to Hell's Gate by the FAA, since that's the actual official place name for that location. What's not on the chart at all is the actual mountain pass, the high point along the route, which is shown with the orange star here. So after August 12th, what we're going to see is Houston Pass, which is the proper USGS name of that location, depicted on the sectionals, on the McGrath sectional, and Hell's Gate will remain on the charts, but as a VFR checkpoint to allow pilots to have some reference as they're flying through that area.
This is very helpful. With a VFR checkpoint, pilots can also increase their situational awareness and use this point to communicate with other pilots. So both of these passes, Rainy and Houston, will get pilots through the Alaska range. How do these routes differ, and is there a reason why pilots might prefer to use one over the other?
Well, going back to look at the trace of these routes now on a Google Earth background so we can look at terrain rather than just topography. The orange route, again, is the route through Rainy Pass, and the actual elevation of Rainy Pass is 3,524 feet. This is not going to be, these elevations won't be on the charts originally, but before the end of the year, FAA is telling us that they're going to add the actual pass elevation not only to these, but many other passes in the state of Alaska. In contrast, Houston Pass, the elevation is 2749, and what was shown as Ptarmigan Pass, now Hell's Gate Canyon, is 2,200 feet approximately. So the difference between Rainey and Houston is 775 feet in terms of vertical elevation, another 550 feet difference between Hell's Gate Canyon and the Houston Pass. So knowing those values when you're flight planning and as you're starting to fly these routes is very useful information, so that if you're encountering ceilings before you get to the pass that aren't going to let you get through the pass, you've got an early indication that this might be a good time to turn around and exercise plan B. So yeah, I think in this case, we've got some new place names to become familiar with. And as you mentioned, not only is it useful for knowing about these in terms of our strategic tackling of these routes, but also we need to use these place names as we're making CTAF calls to reduce the risk of mid-air collision while we're flying in this confined terrain. So hopefully everybody will get their charts updated with this chart cycle, either paper or electronic, and use these new place names so that we're all singing off the same sheet of music as we're happily flying through either of these passes.
Tom, thank you so much for explaining these changes, and thank you for your work with the Mountain Pass Working Group. I appreciate your time being on Hangar Flying, and in addition, we'd like to thank the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association for allowing you to be here.
My pleasure.
Thanks also to Alaska Public Media for allowing us to bring you Hangar Flying, and thank you to the National Weather Service for sharing their time. Have a good evening, everyone.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and it's time for the marine weather segment. We start out with the sea ice edge, and the ice there that remains up over the Arctic Ocean off of the Arctic coast continues to slowly melt, though we are almost toward that point to the maximum retreat northward of the ice. And that'll happen here in another couple of weeks or so. And then, of course, as we head through the later fall and winter, we'll see that ice rebuild and begin to develop southward as colder air takes hold as we approach the winter. Otherwise, we are watching low pressure approaching the southeast panhandle, AKwx, and as a result, we're going to see some stronger winds out of the east, northeast 30 to maybe upwards to 35 knots there near Craig. Waves upwards to 9 feet. Inner waterways could see winds 10 to 20 knots, lesser as you go up from Petersburg to Juneau and Skagway with waves only a couple of feet. And then generally easterly winds 15 to 20 knots, Yakutat down toward Gustavus, and waves 5 to 6 feet in the Gulf. On Sunday, overall winds are going to turn more to a southerly component as a weakening occluded front lifts northwards. And in that southerly flow, waves will be running 3 to 4 feet the inner waterways and 5 to 7 feet along the Gulf Coast. South central areas on Saturday will see variable winds around 10 knots throughout Cook Inlet and waves only a foot or two. And also generally variable winds there off the Kenai and the Prince William Sound between 10 and 15 knots. Waves maybe as much as 4 feet off of the Kenai in the northern Gulf. And then Sunday, we'll see variable winds around 10 knots there, Prince William Sound down to off of the Kenai, south of Cordova with waves of 2 to 4 feet, and trying to turn back toward more southerly, westerly component to the wind there in the mouth of Cook Inlet on up through the length of Cook Inlet with waves 3-4 feet. For Saturday, including Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, winds will be variable around 10 knots around Kodiak Island with waves of 3 to 4 feet, but turning more west-northwest along the length of the Alaska Peninsula with waves 4 to 5 feet either side there in the North Pacific or Bering. And then on Sunday, look for overall west to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet, again, both sides, the North Pacific or the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula. For Saturday, across the Aleutian chain, winds will generally be northwesterly around 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet on both the Bering and North Pacific sides. And on Sunday, winds will generally have a west to northwest component across the eastern half with waves of 4 to 5 feet. and then trying to turn back maybe to a little bit of a southerly component there as you get around and west of Kiska. And again, waves there 3 to 5 feet. Across the west coast, we'll have a weak cold front pushing inland and weakening as a trough. Behind it, northwest winds Saturday, 15 to 20 knots, waves generally 4 to 6 feet from Norton Sound all the way down towards St. Paul and St. George. And then on Sunday, look for winds to be generally a westerly component, west-northwest, with the exception of there, Norton Sound, southwest, 15 knots, and waves between 3 and 5 feet. Along the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the east at 25 knots on Saturday, with waves of 6 to as high as 8 feet northwest of AKwx. And then dropping down along the northwest coast toward Kotzebue Sound, winds will be out of the west-northwest, 20 knots, and waves 5 to 6 feet in the lower Chukchi Sea and through the Bering Strait. And on Sunday, winds will be a bit more variable there along the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots, but still with a northwesterly component, 20 to 25 knots south of Cape Lisburne down through Kotzebue Sound and then into the Bering Strait, with waves running 5 to 6 feet. And a check again of the surface weather maps. Overnight we'll have a weakening cold front work its way into the western interior. That will resume as a trough into the interior on Saturday and Sunday, with areas of rain and scattered rain showers. A couple of the more important features will be the low that lifts up into the southern portion of the Panhandle, bringing some moderate rainfall in the order of 1 to 2 inches there around Craig and Ketchikan. And then back off toward the northwest, low pressure and cold front, initial lead one moving through eastern Russia. As that comes southeastward, it will tend to weaken into Sunday, but a secondary cold front there out over the Chukchi Sea will be approaching the northwest coast. And that is the feature that is going to bring some colder temperatures to the northern half of the state, especially along and north of the Yukon River, including the Brooks Range and North Slope as we head through later Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. So that does it for the weather here on this Friday, September 3rd. Thank you for joining me. And as always, you can get additional weather information online at weather.gov/Alaska. And I'll be back again tomorrow night to give you the latest weather and conditions.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.